everybody! This week I wanted to talk about the different fishing equipment I use and what gear I personally like to buy and what has worked for me. So to start off, let's talk about spinning gear. So personally, I only have two spinning setups. For the lighter spinning setup, I have a Tikka steelhead rod, and this is a medium rod. Personally, this works great when I'm trying to whip or I'm trying to, I even use this when I'm fishing the halaloo or sardine schools. This is my basic go-to when I'm trying to catch anything basically under like 2 pounds. This is paired with a Stratic 3000, and I have 6-pound test in my reel. This has been very successful for me. I've used it for whipping, as I mentioned, fishing like halaloo and sardine schools. Personally, this is something that's worked really well for me. This rod is, I believe, 9'6". Oh no, this is a 10-foot rod. And basically it's long enough where I can use it to get distance while trying to cast from shore, or even if I'm fishing a more rocky area, I'm able to keep my lure out of the off the ledge and bring it up without getting it snagged. So all in all, for me, this has been really, really useful in terms of catching. Like I said, pretty much anything under 2 pounds is what I've used this setup for primarily. I do know there are some guys who go out on the reef, the flats, and they'll use 2-pound tests to catch a 10-pound bonefish or eel. So, you know, those guys, they've got a lot of skill in what they're doing. But personally, I'm not trying to target anything spectacularly large with this setup. So moving on to my second spinning setup, I have this is a Major Craft Solpara, and this is a medium heavy, more on the heavier side rod. I personally like this rod if I'm trying to cast out, let's say, an Oama, or I'm trying to, live bait. That's primarily when I use this. I have a Stratic 5000 on here, and the reel is filled with 20-pound braid. The braid is really helpful because I notice when I'm using live bait, you just never know what you're going to hook up to. Sometimes it's going to be a good sized papio. Sometimes it's a barracuda, and it really helps with not getting cut off as often. Personally, the braid can also cause some difficulties, I found, because if it does get stuck, there's a good chance you're not going to bring up your hook and lead. It's going to be really tough to get it out of the rocks, but it's also very helpful when you're trying to fight something bigger. This rod is 9'6", and it is also weighted for like a 40-gram lure. Personally, when I'm throwing this, I use about an ounce of weight. That's what I would be tossing. And I can get about maybe 45 to 50 yards on a cast. So it's not really great, but it's enough to get the bait out there to where the fish are. I also like to use this setup when I'm trying to catch eels, let's say, for bait, or if I'm on a boat and I'm trying to jig. I also like using this pole. But for spinning setups, yeah, I only have two. I know there's a lot of people out there who has a setup for every little thing, and there's nothing wrong with that. Personally, I've gotten to a point where I had so many different fishing rods and reels that I needed to downsize and figure out what equipment I actually use consistently, and figure out, how to make those things work to catch a greater variety of fish. So there's nothing wrong with anybody who has a specific pole just for, whipping halaloo, or just for mempachi, or whatever it is. I think that it's actually a good idea to figure out what poles work best for certain things. But like I said, I've gotten to a point where I think I just had too much. It was time to clean up and downsize. So next, moving on to conventional setups. So my favorite conventional reel that I love, but they no longer make, is the Pen 555. That was my absolute favorite reel. And the reason is it was light and mostly plastic. So for the most part, I was able to throw it and get really good distance on it because, like I said before, I'm not strong. I'm not the biggest, but it was, sturdy and I could cast it pretty well. And the gear ratio was also really high. So if I'm fighting an eel, let's say, and it's running back towards shore, I can get I can get more line in with fewer cranks. So the efficiency on that side was also good. But since they no longer make that reel, and I try my best to use it, on special occasions because I absolutely don't want to break it or, damage it because they're no longer making parts for it either. I've been using the Torium HG30. Again, it's a lighter reel. I have used the regular Torium. Those reels I found are a little heavier. For some reason, I like the HG because it gives me a smooth cast, and it's also a reel that is hardy and can stand up to, big fish, or in my case, the biggest thing I fought on this was actually a shark, but it gives, enough strength and durability to bring in big fish. I also like to fill my 3.0 reel, the HG30, with 40-pound test line. I personally use J-line. It's 325 yards on a spool, and I found that if I pack that line tight enough on the reel when I'm spooling it, I can get all 325 yards on there. So all in all, that's a really good amount of line, I guess, to have in your reel because there's not a whole bunch of things that are going to take you down to the knot and take out all of your line. And honestly, if it is a fish of that size, you're in for a good fight, regardless of, how much line you have or what pound test it is. It's going to be a good, strong fight, a hard battle. And in terms of the rods that I use for the conventional, growing up, I only use nitros. I know recently I've seen people posting that the nitros are having durability issues. They're casting and breaking. Personally, I've never experienced that, but I do know that when we get the poles to Hawaii, sometimes the wrap or the glaze on the outside is damaged. So if there's any chip or um, any slight damage to it or a nick, I do know it's very possible it's likely to break at that point. Like I said, I've never had a nitro break on me, but I do know that I've heard several instances of it happening. So I guess maybe people should take heed to that and possibly look at other brands. Currently, I'm using Ozones. I have 2 purple Ozones. Like I mentioned earlier, I really like the color purple. So of course, my 2 rods are purple. They are 14-foot Ozones, and for what I do, I enjoy the fact that there's enough flexibility on the tip where it's whippy enough where I can cast fairly well. And it also has a sturdy backbone. So when I'm fighting a bigger fish or shark or stingray, turtle, you're able to bring it in easier because it has the stiffness on the lower half of the rod. So you're able to boost the fish in. I think that there are so many different options in terms of poles out there. A lot of people will like to use a certain one or a certain brand. And really, I think that any of them work. If anybody tells you that you have to use a certain pole or a certain reel, I'll tell you right now, they don't know what they're talking about. The reason is the fish in the water, they cannot see what you're using. So you cannot guarantee me you're going to catch a certain fish using a certain rod and reel because the fish will never know what you're using. They can't tell. So if you're trying to start out, just find something in your budget. I really believe that the key to catching fish is to be there and actually go fishing. If you're not out there fishing, you're not going to catch a fish. It's pretty simple in terms of your odds. The more time you have bait in the water, the more chance you have to catch a fish. So I hope you enjoyed this week's episode. I hope that you learned a few things about the fishing gear that I use. And in all honesty, don't listen to anybody who says you have to use a certain thing. You don't. The fish will never know what you're using. Have a great week, everybody.